December 20th, 1943. Oldenburg, northern Germany. The frost clings to the windows of the Luftwaffe officers' mess like delicate lace, refracting the pale winter light into patterns that shift with each breath of wind. Inside, Oberleutnant Franz Müller sits with his coffee, now cold, staring at a photograph he keeps folded in his breast pocket. His wife, Greta. His daughter, Liesel, barely 3 years old, her face still soft with the innocence that war has not yet touched. The photograph is creased where he grips it, the edges worn from handling. He is 27 years old. He has been flying Messerschmitt Bf 109s for 2 years. He has shot down 6 Allied aircraft, 4 of them American bombers, heavy and lumbering, their crews visible through shattered canopies as they spiraled toward the earth below. He does not think about them often. When he does, he tells himself what every pilot tells himself. They would have done the same to me. The morning briefing is routine. American bombers are expected over Bremen. The 8th Air Force has been relentless, wave after wave, turning German cities into moonscapes of rubble and ash. Franz listens to the intelligence officer describe the probable route, the fighter escort range, the expected altitude. His squadron commander, a veteran with 32 kills, speaks in the calm, measured tone of a man who has accepted that death is simply a matter of probability and time. Franz believes in what he is doing. Not the ideology, not the party slogans that blare from the radio, but something simpler. He is protecting his country, his wife, his daughter. When Allied bombs fall on German cities, they do not distinguish between soldiers and civilians, between factories and homes. The charred bodies pulled from the rubble in Hamburg could have been Greta, Liesel. This is what he tells himself when the doubt creeps in during the quiet hours before dawn. The Luftwaffe taught him more than how to fly. They taught him that war is not personal. The men in those bombers are not individuals with wives and daughters of their own. They are threats, targets, eliminations. To think of them as human is to hesitate, and hesitation in combat is death. Franz has learned this lesson well. He has never hesitated. The other pilots in his squadron speak of the Americans with a mixture of contempt and grudging respect. The bombers come in tight formations, bristling with machine guns, relying on their numbers and firepower to survive. The fighter escorts are improving, pushing deeper into German airspace with each raid. But there is a rhythm to the air war now, a grim familiarity. The Americans attack during the day. The Luftwaffe rises to meet them. Men die. The bombers that survive drop their payloads. More men die. Then silence until the next time. Franz finishes his coffee and stands. The other pilots are gathering their flight gear, checking their watches, making the small rituals that anchor them before combat. Someone tells a joke. Someone else laughs, the sound too loud, too forced. Franz pulls on his leather jacket, the fleece collar stained with oil and sweat. He checks his sidearm, though he knows he will never use it. If he goes down over Germany, the pistol is useless. If he goes down over Allied territory, it will not save him. Outside, the December cold bites through his uniform. His breath forms clouds that dissipate in the wind. The Messerschmitts sit on the frozen grass, their engines ticking as mechanics perform final checks. Franz's aircraft is marked with the number 7 on its fuselage, the paint fresh over a patch where flak shrapnel tore through the metal 3 missions ago. He climbs into the cockpit, the leather seat cold even through his flight suit. The instrument panel glows faintly in the morning light. He thinks, as he always does before takeoff, about coming home. About walking through the door of their small house in Oldenburg, hearing Liesel's footsteps as she runs to him, feeling Greta's arms around his shoulders. He holds that image like a talisman, a promise that this mission will not be his last. Then he pushes it away. Sentiment is a luxury he cannot afford at 20,000 feet. The engine roars to life. The propeller blurs. Franz taxis into position, his wingman close behind. The radio crackles with the calm, professional voices of men preparing to kill or be killed. He adjusts his oxygen mask, checks his gun sight, flexes his gloved fingers on the control stick. The sky above is clear, pale blue streaked with high cirrus clouds. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the American bombers are coming. Franz Müller believes in duty. He believes in protecting what he loves. He believes that war, however brutal, is governed by necessity. That belief has carried him through 2 years of combat. It has allowed him to sleep at night. It has kept the doubt at bay. Today that belief will be tested in a way he cannot imagine. And 50 years from now, when he is an old man with trembling hands and nightmares he cannot escape, he will trace every sleepless night back to this moment. To this frozen morning. To the choice he does not yet know he will have to make. The bomber formation appears first as dark specks against the pale winter sky, a constellation of machines moving with the mechanical precision of a vast airborne army. Franz counts them from his altitude advantage. 37 B-17 flying fortresses, their silver fuselages catching the sunlight, their contrails stretching behind them like wounds across the sky. They are heading toward Bremen, flying at 23,000 feet, their bomb bays still closed. Franz's squadron leader's voice crackles through the radio. Attack from high and ahead. Single pass. Break formation after firing. The Messerschmitts climb, positioning themselves between the bombers and the sun. Franz can feel his heartbeat in his throat, his breathing loud inside the oxygen mask. This is the moment before violence, when time seems to stretch and compress simultaneously, when every sense sharpens to painful clarity. They dive. The bombers grow from specks to silhouettes to machines, their gun turrets tracking the incoming fighters. Tracer fire arcs through the air, bright lines of light that seem deceptively slow until they flash past Franz's canopy close enough to make him flinch. He centers his gun sight on a B-17 flying in the low right position of the formation. His thumb hovers over the firing button. Wait. At 400 meters he fires. The Messerschmitt shudders as the cannons and machine guns unleash their payload. He sees his round strike the bomber's right wing, metal tearing, smoke trailing. But the B-17 holds formation. These machines are built to absorb punishment that would destroy lesser aircraft. Franz pulls up hard, the G-force pressing him into his seat, his vision tunneling as blood drains from his head. Other Messerschmitts flash past him, their guns blazing. The sky is chaos. Then he sees it. A B-17 breaking formation, falling behind, one engine streaming black smoke, another feathered and dead. The bomber is losing altitude, its nose dropping, its pilots fighting to keep it level. Franz's training takes over. Isolated bombers are easy targets. Without the protection of the formation's massed firepower, they are vulnerable. He banks toward it, his engine screaming as he pushes the throttle forward. As he closes the distance, Franz notices details. The bomber's tail section is shredded, its vertical stabilizer torn nearly in half. The ball turret hangs motionless, its guns pointing uselessly at the ground. The left waist gun position shows a gaping hole where the fuselage has been torn open. This aircraft is dying. His crew knows it. And now Franz is about to finish what the others started. He maneuvers into position behind and slightly below the bomber, where the tail gunner would have a clear shot if the tail turret were functioning. But the guns remain silent. Franz can see into the bomber's interior through the damaged sections, can see movement inside, shapes that are men, not machines. He shakes his head, forcing the thought away. Target. Threat. Elimination. His finger tightens on the firing button. Then the pilot of the B-17 does something unexpected. The bomber's nose lifts slightly, the pilot pulling back on the yoke to gain a few precious meters of altitude, buying a few more seconds of life. Through the cockpit glass, Franz sees him. A young man, his face pale, his hands gripping the controls with the desperate strength of someone who knows he is about to die. Their eyes meet across 300 meters of cold air. For one impossible moment, time stops. Franz sees fear in that face. Not the abstract fear of combat, but the specific, terrible fear of a man who knows his aircraft is crippled, who knows he is too far over enemy territory to reach home, who is calculating how long his crew has before they must bail out or ride the bomber down to the frozen earth below. And in that moment, Franz does not see an enemy. He sees himself. He sees what he would look like if their situations were reversed. If it were his Messerschmitt trailing smoke over England. If it were Greta receiving the telegram. If it were Liesel growing up without her father, holding a photograph of a man she would barely remember. Franz's finger releases the firing button. His hand drops from the control stick. His breathing is ragged inside the oxygen mask. The bomber continues its shallow descent, its surviving crew members visible now, moving frantically inside the damaged fuselage, preparing for the bailout they know must come soon. Franz flies alongside them, close enough to see their faces through the broken sections of the aircraft. Young faces. American faces. Terrified faces. What happens next contradicts every instinct, every rule, every principle that has kept Franz alive for 2 years of combat. Instead of destroying the crippled bomber, he moves his Messerschmitt into formation beside it. He flies close to the B-17's left wing, his fighter small and fast next to the bomber's bulk. Through the cockpit glass, the American pilot stares at him with an expression Franz will remember for the rest of his life. Confusion. Disbelief. Hope. Franz makes a decision that will haunt him until his death. He will escort this crippled bomber out of German airspace. He will protect it from other fighters. He will give these men a chance to reach neutral territory, to bail out over the North Sea where British rescue boats patrol, to survive. He does not think about the orders he is disobeying, the duty he is abandoning, the consequences that will follow. He thinks only about the young pilot in the bomber and about coming home to Liesel. He stays with the B-17 as it limps westward, losing altitude with each passing kilometer. Twice, other Luftwaffe fighters approach and twice Franz positions his Messerschmitt between them and the bomber, waggling his wings in the signal that means this target is his. Leave it alone. The other fighters peel away, confused but unwilling to interfere with another pilot's kill. At the German coast, Franz pulls alongside the bomber one final time. The American pilot raises his hand in a gesture that transcends language and nationality. A salute. An acknowledgement. Thank you. Franz returns it, his gloved hand touching his forehead, his throat tight with an emotion he cannot name. Then he peels away, banking hard back toward German territory, leaving the crippled B-17 to continue alone over the North Sea. Franz lands at his base 30 minutes later. His hands are shaking as he climbs from the cockpit. His flight commander asks if he got the bomber. Franz nods. Claims he shot it down over the North Sea. No witnesses. No confirmation possible. The lie tastes like ash in his mouth. That night, lying in his barracks bunk, Franz cannot sleep. He stares at the ceiling, seeing the American pilot's face the moment their eyes met, the salute. He has broken the most fundamental rule of war. He has shown mercy to the enemy. And he does not know if what he did was courage or cowardice, nobility or betrayal. The choice will define the rest of his life. But that understanding comes later. On this night he simply lies awake, wondering if the American bomber made it home, wondering if those young men lived, wondering what he has just done to himself. January 1944. Oldenburg. Franz returns home on leave 3 weeks after the incident. Greta meets him at the door, Liesel clinging to her skirt, and for a moment everything is as it should be. His wife's embrace. His daughter's laugh. The smell of the small kitchen, potato soup simmering on the stove, the warmth of the house against the winter cold. He should feel relief. He should feel joy. Instead he feels like an imposter wearing his own skin. Greta notices. How could she not? She knows him better than anyone, knows the particular quality of his silence, can read the tension in his shoulders when he holds Liesel, the way his gaze drifts to the window as if searching for something he cannot name. She asks if something happened. He says no. The lie comes easily now, practiced. He has told it so many times in the 3 weeks since the incident that he almost believes it himself. They sit together in the evening after Liesel is asleep, the radio playing softly, and Greta takes his hand. She tells him about the rationing, about the neighbor's son who was killed on the Eastern Front, about Liesel's nightmares when the air raid sirens sound. She tells him she is grateful he is safe, that she prays every night for his return. And Franz nods and says the right words, but inside him something has fractured, some certainty he did not know he possessed until it was gone. He cannot tell her what he did. The words will not form. How does he explain that he let enemy bombers escape, that he violated his oath, that he betrayed his comrades who are dying every day to stop the Allied bombing? How does he explain that when he closed his eyes, he saw not the enemy but another man who wanted desperately to go home to his own family? The truth is impossible, so he buries it. He tells himself that silence is mercy. That Greta does not need to carry this burden. That it is his alone. But the silence grows heavier. When his leave ends and he returns to his squadron, Franz discovers that he cannot escape the memory. Every time he climbs into his Messerschmitt, every time he closes on a crippled bomber, he hesitates. That split second of hesitation that would have killed him before the incident now paralyzes him. His flight commander notices his declining kill rate, the way he breaks off attacks earlier than necessary, the new cautiousness in his flying. In March 1944, Franz is transferred to training duties. The official reason is his experience and skill, the need for veteran pilots to teach the next generation. The unofficial reason, whispered in the officer's mess, is that he has lost his nerve. That combat has broken something inside him. Franz accepts the transfer without protest. Part of him is relieved. He will not have to make that choice again. He will not have to face another young pilot's eyes through a bomber's windscreen. The training base is in Bavaria, far from the front, and Franz spends his days teaching eager young pilots the mechanics of aerial combat, the tactics that kept him alive, the ruthlessness required to survive. He does his job well. His students respect him. But at night, alone in his quarters, Franz dreams of the B-17. He dreams of the moment he pulled alongside it, of the American pilot's face, of the salute. Sometimes the dreams are peaceful. Sometimes they are nightmares where he fires instead of escorting, where he watches the bomber disintegrate, where he sees the bodies falling. The war ends in May 1945. Germany collapses. Franz survives, unlike so many of his squadron mates who died in the final desperate months, their Messerschmitts overwhelmed by waves of Allied fighters. He returns to Oldenburg to find his house damaged but standing, Greta and Liesel alive, thin but healthy. They have survived the war. He should be grateful. He should be able to rebuild. But the weight has not lifted. In the chaos of post-war Germany, Franz takes work where he can find it. First as a laborer clearing rubble. Then as a mechanic. Eventually as a draftsman for a construction firm. He does not talk about the war. Nobody does. The entire nation is trying to forget, to bury the trauma under the daily struggle for survival. Franz welcomes the silence. But privately the weight grows. He watches Liesel grow into a young woman, watches Greta age, watches the world rebuild itself around him. He becomes a good father, a faithful husband, a reliable worker. He attends church on Sundays. He helps his neighbors. He lives a quiet, ordinary life. And every night, before sleep comes, he thinks about the American pilot. He wonders if the man survived. He wonders if the bomber made it home. He wonders if his act of mercy meant anything, or if those men died anyway, frozen in the North Sea, his choice meaningless. The German economic miracle of the 1950s brings prosperity. Franz's construction firm grows. He earns enough to buy a small house, to send Liesel to university, to provide for Greta's comfort in her later years. Outwardly he is successful. Inwardly he is hollow. The weight of what he did, and more importantly what he never told anyone, has become a physical presence inside his chest. Some mornings he wakes and cannot breathe, cannot remember where he is, his heart racing as if he is still in the cockpit, still making the choice that changed everything. He considers telling Greta. Several times, lying in bed beside her, the words rise to his lips. But he cannot speak them. Too much time has passed. The silence has calcified into something immovable. And beneath his desire to confess lies a deeper fear. That if he tells the truth, Greta will see him differently. That she will wonder what kind of man her husband really is. That she will realize she has been married for 30 years to someone she never truly knew. By the 1960s, Franz has stopped thinking about the incident every day. But it never fully leaves him. It is there in the catch of his breath when he sees an airplane overhead. It is there in the nightmares that come less frequently but with undiminished intensity. It is there in the moments of silence at family gatherings, when conversation flows around him and he is somewhere else, someone else, flying beside a crippled bomber over the North Sea. Franz develops a routine to manage the weight. He walks every morning before dawn, alone, following the same path through Oldenburg streets. He tells Greta the walks help his back, his circulation, his sleep. This is not entirely a lie. But the real reason is that these walks are the only time he allows himself to remember fully, to replay the incident in his mind, to examine his choice from every angle, seeking understanding or justification or peace. He finds none of these things. But the ritual helps him contain the weight, to keep it from spilling into his waking life. Liesel marries in 1967. She gives Franz 2 grandchildren. He holds them and feels the same fierce protectiveness he felt when Liesel was born, the same desperate need to shield them from harm. And he thinks about the American pilot's family, about grandchildren that man might have, about the life that continued because Franz chose mercy over duty. This thought brings him something close to comfort. But it is not enough. The weight remains. In 1973, Greta dies. The doctors say it was her heart, that it simply stopped while she was sleeping, that she felt no pain. Franz sits by her bedside in the hospital, holding her hand, and realizes that the opportunity to tell her the truth has passed forever. Whatever secrets he carries, he will carry alone. The guilt of his silence joins the guilt of his action, 2 weights that compound each other, pressing down on him until some days he can barely stand upright. Franz retires. His days empty of structure. The walks continue longer now, sometimes lasting hours. He visits Liesel and his grandchildren but feels increasingly detached, as if he is watching his own life from a great distance. His friends from the war years have mostly died or moved away. He attends veterans gatherings occasionally, but the conversation makes him uncomfortable. The old pilots talk about their victories, their close calls, the camaraderie of combat. Franz sits quietly, contributing nothing. He is not part of their narrative. His war was different. His war included a choice they never made. The 1980s bring a resurgence of interest in World War II history. Books, documentaries, museums. Franz watches some of this coverage and is struck by how clean it all seems in retrospect, how the moral lines are drawn with such confidence, how little room exists for ambiguity or doubt. He wonders what historians would make of his choice. Would they call it a war crime, failure to engage the enemy? Or would they call it humanity, a moment of grace in the midst of mechanized slaughter? He realizes he does not know. He is not certain there is a right answer. On his 75th birthday, alone in his house, Franz takes out a notebook and writes down the entire story. Every detail he can remember. The date, the location, the damage to the bomber, the American pilot's face, the salute. He writes for hours, his hand cramping, the words spilling out in a torrent that has been building for 45 years. When he is finished, he reads what he has written. Then he tears the pages out of the notebook and burns them in the fireplace, watching the paper curl and blacken, the words turning to ash. He tells himself he is protecting his family, protecting his reputation, protecting the memory of the man he has become. But he knows the truth. He is afraid. Afraid of judgment. Afraid that his choice, examined in the harsh light of scrutiny, will be found wanting. Afraid that the one time in his life when he acted according to his conscience rather than his duty will be revealed as weakness, cowardice, betrayal. The weight does not lift. It never lifts. And Franz begins to understand that it never will. That he will carry it to his grave, this secret, this choice, this single moment of mercy that has defined 50 years of silence. He is 90 years old, his hands shake, his memory fails him on everyday matters, but he remembers the American pilot's face with perfect clarity. He remembers the salute. He remembers the choice. And he wonders, as he has wondered for 50 years, whether it was worth it. December 1991. Munich. Franz Müller is 75 years old when he sees the advertisement in the newspaper. It is a small notice, tucked between articles about the collapse of the Soviet Union and the reunification of Germany. A historical society is collecting oral histories from Luftwaffe veterans, documenting their experiences before the generation dies out entirely. They are particularly interested in encounters between enemy pilots, moments of professional respect or unexpected humanity in combat. They promise confidentiality if requested, a safe space for veterans to share stories they have kept silent for decades. Franz reads the advertisement 3 times. His coffee grows cold as he stares at the page. His hands, spotted with age and trembling slightly from a palsy he developed 5 years ago, grip the newspaper so tightly that it crumples. For the first time in nearly 50 years, Franz allows himself to consider the possibility of speaking. Of unburdening himself to someone, anyone, even if it is only a stranger with a recording device. He does not respond to the advertisement immediately. Instead, he carries it with him, folded in his wallet, for 3 weeks. He takes it out when he is alone, reads it again, imagines what he would say, how he would begin the story. But imagination is not the same as action, and each time he considers calling the number listed, fear stops him. Fear of judgment. Fear that his choice, spoken aloud after half a century, will sound like the excuse of a man who betrayed his duty. Fear that the American pilot died anyway, that his mercy was meaningless, that he has carried this weight for nothing. Christmas approaches. Liesel invites him to celebrate with her family, his grandchildren now teenagers with lives and concerns he barely understands. He sits in their warm living room, surrounded by family, and feels entirely alone. His granddaughter asks him about the war. What it was like to fly. If he was scared. Simple questions, asked with the casual curiosity of someone who cannot imagine what war actually means. Franz gives simple answers. Yes, he was scared. Yes, flying was difficult. No, he does not like to talk about it much. The conversation moves on. No one presses him. No one sees the weight. In January 1992, Franz finally makes the call. The woman who answers is young, perhaps in her 30s, her voice efficient and kind. She explains the project, the importance of preserving these memories, the historical value of personal testimony. Franz listens and then asks if the stories can be given anonymously with identifying details removed. The woman assures him this is possible, that many veterans prefer it that way. Franz schedules an interview for the following week. The night before the interview, Franz cannot sleep. He lies in his bed, the room dark except for the faint glow of streetlights through the curtains, and rehearses what he will say. He has never told this story to anyone. Not Greta, now dead 12 years. Not Liesel. Not the other pilots. Not even the priest during confession, though he has confessed other sins, smaller sins, sins that did not threaten to unravel the identity he has built over 5 decades. This will be the first time the story exists outside his own mind. The interview takes place in a small office in Munich's University district. The historian is a woman named Dr. Schneider, middle-aged, wearing glasses, her manner professional but warm. She offers Franz tea, which he accepts even though his hands shake so badly he can barely hold the cup. She sets up a recording device, explains that they will talk for as long as he is comfortable, that he can stop at any time. Then she asks him to begin at the beginning, to tell her about his service, about the war. Franz starts with the basics. His training. His squadron. The missions. His voice is steady, almost mechanical, reciting facts that have been part of his official story for half a century. Dr. Schneider listens, takes notes, occasionally asks clarifying questions. Franz can feel her waiting for something more, something beneath the surface of these sanitized memories. And then he reaches December 1943. The words catch in his throat. He stops. Clears his throat. Starts again. His voice is different now, quieter, the steadiness replaced by something raw and unguarded. He tells her about the crippled B-17, about the American pilot's face, about the choice he made to escort the bomber instead of destroying it. He tells her about the salute. About the lie he told his flight commander. About the 50 years of silence. When he finishes, the room is quiet. Dr. Schneider has stopped taking notes. She is looking at him with an expression Franz cannot read. Pity? Understanding? Judgment? He waits for her response, his heart racing, feeling exposed in a way he has not felt since the war. Dr. Schneider speaks carefully. She says that what he did was remarkable, that acts of mercy in combat are rare and valuable testimonies to the persistence of humanity even in the worst circumstances. She says that his story deserves to be preserved, that it illustrates the moral complexity soldiers faced, that it challenges simplistic narratives of good and evil. She says all the right things. But Franz hears what she does not say. That his choice was also a betrayal. That his mercy came at the cost of his duty. That he will never know whether it mattered. The interview ends. Dr. Schneider thanks him for his time, assures him his story will be handled with sensitivity, reminds him that the recording will remain confidential unless he grants permission for its use. Franz nods, signs the necessary forms and leaves. He walks through Munich's cold streets for hours, his coat pulled tight against the wind, feeling neither better nor worse than before. The weight is still there. Telling the story has not lifted it. If anything, speaking the words aloud has made them more real, has forced him to confront the reality that his choice cannot be undone, its consequences cannot be known. But something has changed. The story exists now beyond his own memory. It is recorded, preserved, real. And with that realization comes a new question, one that has haunted him for 50 years but which he can now acknowledge openly. Did the American pilot survive? Did the bomber make it home? Do those men know that a German fighter pilot chose to let them live? Franz begins to search for answers. He contacts military archives, writes letters to American veterans organizations, places advertisements in magazines dedicated to World War II history. He describes the encounter, the date, the location, the distinctive damage to the B-17. He does not include his name, but he includes every detail he can remember about the American aircraft. Someone, somewhere must know what happened to that bomber. The responses trickle in slowly. Most are dead ends. Veterans who flew different missions, different aircraft, different theaters entirely. Historians who find his description interesting but cannot match it to any documented incident. Archivists who search their records and find nothing definitive. Month after month, Franz sends letters and receives polite replies that lead nowhere. Then, in November 1992, nearly a year after his interview with Dr. Schneider, Franz receives a letter from an American veteran named Charles Mitchell. Mitchell writes that he was a navigator on a B-17 that was damaged over Germany in December 1943, that his bomber was escorted to safety by a German fighter who did not fire, that he has spent 49 years wondering why. Mitchell includes a photograph. A grainy black and white image of a B-17 named Ye Olde Pub, its tail section shredded, its fuselage torn open. Franz stares at the photograph and knows with absolute certainty that this is the bomber. This is the crew. These are the men. Mitchell's letter includes a phone number. Franz stares at it for 3 days. His hands shake worse now, not from palsy but from the enormity of what he is about to do. After 50 years of silence, he is going to speak to the man whose life he saved, or at least tried to save. He is going to hear whether his choice mattered. When Franz finally makes the call, his English is rusty but adequate. Mitchell answers on the third ring. Franz identifies himself, gives the date and location of the encounter, describes what he did. There is silence on the other end of the line. Then Mitchell speaks, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the pilot," he says. "You're the one who let us live." They talk for 2 hours. Mitchell tells Franz what happened after the escort. The bomber limped across the North Sea, barely airworthy, its crew certain they would have to ditch in the water. But somehow, impossibly, they made it to English airspace, nursed the crippled aircraft to a crash landing at a coastal airfield. All 10 crew members survived. The pilot, Charles Brown, became a commercial airline captain after the war. The tail gunner, who had been wounded, recovered fully and became a teacher. They lived. They had families. They grew old. Mitchell tells Franz that he has spent decades trying to understand why a German pilot would escort them instead of finishing them off. He thought perhaps it was a malfunction, that the Germans' guns had jammed. Or that it was a different kind of cruelty, letting them suffer a slow death over the water rather than a quick one in combat. He never imagined it was mercy. He never imagined the German pilot made a choice that would haunt him for 50 years. Franz listens to all of this, tears running down his face, his voice breaking when he tries to speak. He tells Mitchell about the weight he has carried, about the silence, about the fear that his choice was meaningless. Mitchell is quiet for a long moment. Then he says something that changes everything. 10 men lived because of you, Mitchell says. 10 men went home to their families. They had children. Those children had children. There are dozens of people alive today who wouldn't exist if you had pulled that trigger. Your choice mattered. It mattered to all of us. And we never forgot the German pilot who let us live. The weight does not disappear. Franz understands now that it never will, that some choices mark you permanently, that mercy comes with its own burden. But for the first time in 50 years, Franz begins to believe that the weight was worth carrying. That his choice, his betrayal, his moment of conscience, created something more valuable than duty. It created life. It created futures. It created the possibility of reconciliation between enemies who should have killed each other but chose something else. Franz and Mitchell speak several more times over the following months. Mitchell sends him photographs of the crew, addresses of the other survivors, stories of their lives after the war. Franz writes letters, apologizing for the damage he inflicted before his moment of mercy, explaining the impossible situation pilots faced. The responses are uniformly gracious, sometimes tearful, always grateful. In February 1993, Franz receives a letter from Charles Brown himself, the pilot of the B-17. Brown writes that he has spent his entire life trying to repay the debt he owes to an unknown German pilot, that he became an instructor and trained hundreds of commercial pilots, that he tried to live in a way that honored the gift he was given over the North Sea. He writes that he would like to meet Franz, to shake his hand, to say thank you in person. Franz reads the letter and feels something he has not felt in 50 years. Not peace exactly. Not absolution. But something close. A lightening. A shift. The weight is still there, will always be there. But now it is shared. Now others know. Now the story is no longer his alone. May 1995. Seattle, Washington. The airport is crowded with travelers, families reuniting, business people rushing to their gates, the constant white noise of announcements and rolling luggage. Franz Müller stands near the baggage claim, his hands gripping the handle of a small suitcase, his eyes scanning the crowd for a face he has seen only in photographs. His granddaughter, who accompanied him from Germany, touches his arm gently, asks if he is all right. Franz nods but does not speak. His throat is too tight for words. He is 79 years old. The flight from Munich was exhausting, 12 hours of cramped seating and fitful sleep, his old body protesting the altitude and the stillness. But exhaustion is not what makes his hands shake now. He is about to meet Charles Brown, the American pilot he escorted to safety 52 years ago. The man whose life he saved. The man whose face has haunted his dreams for half a century. A group of people approaches. Franz recognizes Brown immediately, even though the pilot is now 76, his hair white, his face creased with age. Brown is taller than Franz with the posture of a man who spent decades in cockpits. He is flanked by his wife, Charlie, and several other members of the original B-17 crew who have traveled to Seattle for this reunion. Charles Mitchell, the navigator who helped arrange this meeting, is among them. So is the tail gunner, Hugh Eckenrode, who was wounded during the mission. The two pilots stop a few feet apart. They stare at each other across the crowded terminal, two old men who share a history that defies explanation. The moment stretches, becomes uncomfortable, as if neither knows how to begin, what words could possibly bridge the gulf between them. Then Brown extends his hand. Franz takes it. Their grip is firm despite the trembling of age, and for a long moment they simply hold on, their eyes locked, their faces working through emotions too complex for simple expression. Relief, grief, gratitude, shame, recognition. Around them, the airport continues its chaotic flow, but in this small circle of space, time has stopped, has circled back to December 1943, to the moment when two enemies looked at each other across 300 meters of cold air and chose humanity over duty. Brown speaks first. His voice is rough with emotion. "I never thought I'd meet you," he says. "I never thought I'd be able to say thank you." Franz shakes his head, his English halting. "I did nothing. I could not." He stops, unable to finish the sentence. How does he explain that what he did was not heroism but weakness? That he has carried the guilt of his mercy for 50 years? That he is not the noble figure Brown imagines but simply a man who hesitated at the wrong moment, who chose conscience over duty, who betrayed everything he was supposed to believe in? But Brown seems to understand what Franz cannot say. "You gave us our lives," he says simply. "Everything after that day, everything we became, everyone we loved, it all exists because you made a choice. That's not nothing. That's everything." The reunion moves to a nearby hotel, where a conference room has been reserved. The survivors of Ye Olde Pub's crew gather with their families, and Franz finds himself surrounded by people who should be strangers but who feel strangely familiar. They tell stories about the mission, about the damage the bomber sustained, about the terror of being alone over enemy territory with a German fighter on their tail. They tell him what they thought when he pulled alongside them instead of firing, how certain they were that they were about to die, how incomprehensible his gesture of mercy seemed at the time. Franz listens to all of this with a mixture of wonder and pain. These men remember him as their savior, but he remembers himself as a traitor. The dissonance is almost unbearable. He tries to explain about the weight he has carried, about the silence, about the nights he woke from nightmares in which he made a different choice. But the Americans seem unable to accept his guilt. To them, what he did was simple heroism, a moment of grace in the midst of mechanized slaughter. They cannot see the betrayal he committed, the duty he violated, the cost of his conscience. Over dinner that evening, the conversation becomes more personal. Brown talks about his career after the war, about the thousands of flights he made as a commercial pilot, about the students he trained. He talks about his family, his children and grandchildren, the ordinary life he was able to live because Franz chose not to kill him. Then he turns to Franz and asks the question that has defined both their lives. "Why did you do it? Why didn't you shoot us down?" Franz considers the question. He has asked himself the same thing thousands of times over 50 years, and he has never found a satisfactory answer. Finally he says, "I saw your face, and I saw my own. I thought about my daughter and I thought you must have a daughter too. I thought about going home and I knew you wanted to go home. I could not. I was not able to make you die." The room is silent. Brown nods slowly, his eyes bright with tears. "I do have a daughter," he says quietly. "Two daughters actually. And 6 grandchildren. They exist because you saw my face." Later, after dinner, Franz and Brown walk together along Seattle's waterfront. It is a clear spring evening, the last light fading over Puget Sound, the air cool and salt-scented. They walk in companionable silence for a while, two old men moving slowly, their bodies worn by age and memory. Finally, Franz speaks. "I have carried this for 50 years, he says. "The weight of what I did. I betrayed my duty. I lied to my commander. I let the enemy escape. In Germany after the war I could not speak of this. People did not want to hear about mercy. They wanted to forget. So I was silent. And the silence became heavier than the choice. Brown stops walking. He turns to face Franz, his expression serious. You didn't betray anything that mattered, he says. You honored something more important than duty. You honored life. You honored the humanity we were all supposed to forget about in combat. That's not betrayal. That's the most courageous thing a soldier can do. Franz shakes his head. But the war. My comrades were dying. My country was losing. I should have. No, Brown interrupts gently. You did exactly what you should have done. You made a choice that war told you was impossible. You saw an enemy as a human being. That's not weakness. That's strength. He pauses, then adds, and you need to understand something. You think you've carried this weight alone. But I've carried it too. I've spent 50 years trying to understand why I lived when so many others died. Why a German pilot chose mercy when everything in war screamed for violence. Your choice gave me life, but it also gave me a question I couldn't answer. Until now. They resume walking. The water laps against the pilings, a gentle rhythmic sound that seems to echo the years between 1943 and 1995, the long silence that has finally been broken. Franz feels something shifting inside him, not the weight lifting entirely, but distributing differently, becoming more bearable. The Americans do not see him as a traitor. They see him as the man who gave them their futures. And perhaps, Franz begins to think, perhaps that is what matters more than duty or orders or the abstract necessities of war. The next day the reunion includes a ceremony. The veterans gather at a local museum that has agreed to host the event, and Franz is presented with a commemorative plaque honoring his act of mercy. The plaque is simple, engraved with the date of the encounter and the words, "For choosing humanity over hatred." Franz accepts it with trembling hands, unable to speak, overwhelmed by the kindness of these men who should hate him but who instead honor him. Charles Mitchell gives a speech about the importance of remembering that war does not erase conscience, that even in the worst circumstances, individuals can make choices that transcend the violence surrounding them. He talks about reconciliation, about the possibility of healing even decades after conflict ends. He talks about Franz's courage, his burden, his silence, and the importance of breaking that silence now in the twilight of their lives so that future generations understand that war is not simple, that enemies are not monsters, that mercy is possible even in hell. Franz stands during the speech, surrounded by the men he once tried to kill, the men he then chose to save. He looks at their faces, sees the years etched into them, sees the lives they have lived. Brown's 2 daughters are there and their children and their children's children. 3 generations that exist because of a choice he made in a fraction of a second over the North Sea. The weight is still there. The guilt has not disappeared. But standing in this room, surrounded by this improbable family, Franz begins to believe that perhaps his choice was not betrayal but the truest form of loyalty. Loyalty to something deeper than nations or ideologies or military orders. Loyalty to life itself. That night, alone in his hotel room, Franz writes in the journal he has kept since retirement. He writes about the reunion, about the faces of the men he saved, about their gratitude and his lingering guilt. He writes about Brown's words on the waterfront, about the possibility that his choice was courage rather than cowardice. And then he writes something he has never allowed himself to write before. Perhaps I did the right thing. Perhaps mercy is never wrong even when it costs you everything. Perhaps the weight I have carried is not punishment but proof that conscience survives even in war. Perhaps I am not a traitor but simply a man who chose to be human when everything around me screamed to be otherwise. He reads the words back to himself, considering whether he believes them. The answer is complicated. He does not feel absolved. He does not feel the weight lift. But he feels something else. A kind of quiet acceptance. A recognition that his choice, whatever its cost, created something valuable. That the burden he has carried for 50 years is the price of preserving life, and that some prices are worth paying. Franz returns to Germany a week later. The flight home is easier, his body less tense, his sleep less troubled by nightmares. He carries with him the plaque, dozens of photographs from the reunion, and a sense that the story has finally found its proper ending. Not a happy ending exactly. The weight remains. The questions persist. But the silence has been broken, and in its place is something new. Understanding. Recognition. Connection. He will live 4 more years after the Seattle reunion, dying peacefully in his sleep in 1999 at the age of 83. In those final years he will speak openly about what happened in December 1943, giving interviews to historians, corresponding with the surviving members of Brown's crew, visiting schools to talk about the moral complexities of war. The story will become public, no longer his secret alone. And though he never fully escapes the weight of his choice, he learns to carry it differently. Not as shame but as memory. Not as betrayal, but as witness to the possibility of mercy even in the darkest circumstances. The last letter he receives before his death is from Brown, sent just 2 weeks before Franz passes. In it, Brown writes simply, "Thank you for my life. Thank you for my family. Thank you for teaching me that even enemies can choose humanity. You were the bravest man I ever met, and I will remember you until my last breath." Franz reads the letter 3 times, then places it beside Greta's photograph on his nightstand. That night he sleeps without nightmares for the first time in 50 years. And when he dies 2 days later, his daughter finds the letter still there, along with the plaque from Seattle, and a journal entry written in his shaking handwriting. I made the right choice. It took 50 years to understand this, but I made the right choice. The weight was worth carrying. The silence was worth breaking. And if I could go back to that December morning in 1943, knowing everything I know now, I would do it again. I would choose mercy. I would honor life. I would be human. Charles Brown died in 2008, 12 years after Franz. Before his death, he worked tirelessly to ensure that the story of their encounter would be preserved and shared. He gave speeches at military academies, wrote extensively about the incident, and collaborated with historians to document every detail. He said repeatedly that Franz Müller's act of mercy had defined his entire life, that every moment after December 1943 existed because a German pilot chose conscience over duty. The story of Franz and Charlie, as they became known, has been told in books, documentaries, and museums dedicated to World War II history. It has become a touchstone in discussions about the moral complexity of war, the persistence of humanity in the midst of violence, and the possibility of reconciliation between enemies. Military ethicists use it as a case study in the tensions between duty and conscience, between orders and morality, between the demands of war and the imperatives of humanity. But beyond its value as a historical or ethical example, the story resonates on a deeper level. It speaks to something fundamental about human nature, about our capacity for mercy even when mercy seems impossible, about the weight that moral choices carry, about the importance of breaking silence even decades after the fact. Franz spent 50 years believing he was alone with his burden. He died knowing that his choice mattered, that it was witnessed and honored, that it created life rather than destroying it. The surviving members of Ye Olde Pub's crew, and their descendants, have formed a kind of extended family with Franz's descendants. They gather occasionally in Seattle or Munich to remember the encounter, to honor both pilots, and to reflect on what their story means. These gatherings are not celebrations of war but recognitions of the human cost of conflict and the extraordinary moments when that cost is reduced by individual acts of conscience. Liesel, Franz's daughter, has said in interviews that she never knew about her father's burden until after the Seattle reunion. He had carried it so privately, had hidden it so completely behind his quiet, ordinary life, that even his own family did not sense its weight. After 1995, when the story became public and Franz began to speak about it, Liesel saw her father differently. Not as the mild-mannered draftsman who had raised her, but as someone who had made an impossible choice and lived with its consequences for half a century. She said she was proud of him, but also heartbroken that he had felt unable to share his burden, that he had suffered alone for so long. The American crew members who survived into the 21st century have all emphasized the same theme in their reflections on the encounter. They lived full lives, raised families, pursued careers, experienced joy and sorrow and all the ordinary complexities of human existence. And all of it, every moment, every relationship, every experience happened because Franz Müller hesitated for 3 seconds over the North Sea. They do not call it a miracle. They call it a choice. A human choice that transcended the dehumanizing logic of war. Some military historians have criticized Franz's decision. They argue that his failure to destroy an enemy bomber constituted a violation of his duty, that his mercy, however compassionate, allowed men who might have returned to bomb Germany again, that his choice could have contributed, however infinitesimally, to German casualties. These critics represent the perspective of war as a system, where individual conscience must be subordinated to strategic necessity, where mercy is a luxury that prolonged conflicts cannot afford. But others argue that Franz's choice represents something more important than tactical efficiency. It represents the retention of moral agency in circumstances designed to eliminate it. War, they argue, depends on dehumanizing the enemy, on transforming individuals into targets, on suppressing the natural human reluctance to kill. Franz's moment of mercy was a refusal to be dehumanized himself, a reassertion of his own humanity in the face of a system that demanded he become a killing machine. From this perspective, his choice was not weakness but the highest form of courage. The tension between these interpretations is never fully resolved, nor should it be. The story of Franz and Charlie is valuable precisely because it resists simple conclusions, because it forces us to grapple with questions that have no easy answers. What do we owe to our enemies? When does duty become complicity? How do we live with the weight of our choices? What is the proper relationship between individual conscience and collective obligation? These are not abstract philosophical questions. They are lived experiences, carried in the bodies and minds of those who must make impossible decisions in impossible circumstances. Franz's journals, made public after his death with his family's permission, reveal the depth of his internal struggle. He never fully reconciled his act of mercy with his sense of duty. Even after the Seattle reunion, even after being honored by the men he saved, even after hearing Brown say that he had done the right thing, Franz continued to question himself. The weight never fully lifted. The doubt never fully resolved. This, perhaps, is the most important lesson of his story. Moral courage does not bring peace. It brings burden. And sometimes that burden must simply be carried, with no expectation of resolution or absolution. The photographs from the Seattle reunion show two old men smiling, their arms around each other's shoulders, surrounded by family. They look like friends, like brothers even. The cameras captured a moment of reconciliation, of connection across the gulf of history and nationality and violence. But what the cameras could not capture is the complexity beneath that image. Franz's lingering guilt. Brown's survivor's burden. The weight they both carried, different but related, the price of mercy and the cost of being spared. In the decades since their deaths, the story has taken on a life of its own. It has been adapted for young adult readers, taught in schools, referenced in discussions about military ethics and humanitarian law. Each retelling shapes it slightly differently, emphasizes different aspects, draws different conclusions. Some versions focus on the drama of the encounter itself, the visual spectacle of a German fighter escorting an enemy bomber. Others focus on the 50 years of silence, the psychological burden, the importance of speaking truth. Still others focus on the reunion, the embrace between enemies, the possibility of healing even decades after the wound. All of these versions contain truth. But none captures the entirety of what happened. Because what happened was not just a single act on a single day. It was a choice that rippled across 5 decades, that shaped 2 lives and dozens of others, that posed questions without answers and burdens without relief. It was a moment when war's logic failed, when the machine malfunctioned, when an individual human being asserted his humanity at great personal cost. The German military archives contain no record of the incident. Franz's flight report, filed in December 1943, claims he shot down the American bomber over the North Sea. The lie remains in the official record, unchallenged and uncorrectable. In one sense this is fitting. The truth of what happened belongs not to institutions or archives but to the individuals who lived it, who carried it, who finally spoke it. History is not only what is written in official documents. It is also what is remembered, what is confessed, what is passed down through stories and photographs and reunions of old men who should have killed each other but chose something else. Today the descendants of both men maintain the story. They speak at veterans' events, give interviews, visit schools. They emphasize that their ancestors were not extraordinary men but ordinary ones, shaped by their time and circumstances, who in one moment made a choice that defied expectation. They caution against simplifying the story, against turning it into a fable of redemption or a parable of forgiveness. The reality is messy. Franz carried guilt until his death. Brown carried gratitude mixed with survivor's guilt. Neither found perfect peace. But they found each other, and in that finding they discovered that their burdens, though individual, were also shared. The final photograph ever taken of Franz Müller shows him in his garden in Oldenburg, 3 months before his death. He is holding his granddaughter's baby, his great-granddaughter, a child who would never have been born if Franz had followed his orders in December 1943. He is smiling in the photograph but his eyes hold something else. Not sadness exactly. Not regret. But a kind of quiet knowing, an awareness of weight and consequence and the irreducible complexity of being human in times that demand we be otherwise. On the back of the photograph, written in Franz's shaking hand, are the words he spoke to Charles Brown during their reunion. I saw your face, and I saw my own. These 7 words contain the entirety of the story. The recognition that enemies are human. The cost of that recognition. The burden of acting on it. The weight that follows. And, ultimately, the value of a single choice made in a fraction of a second, rippling across 50 years, creating life where there should have been death, building bridges where there should have been only silence. Franz Müller was haunted for 50 years by an act of mercy. He carried a weight that never fully lifted, asked questions that never fully resolved, lived with doubt and guilt and the unbearable knowledge that he had betrayed his duty. But he also created something extraordinary. He gave 10 men their lives back. He gave those men's children and grandchildren the chance to exist. He demonstrated that even in the machinery of war, human choice persists. That mercy is possible. That conscience can survive. Whether the weight was worth carrying, only Franz could say. And he gave different answers at different times. But in his final journal entry written 2 days before his death, he wrote something that might serve as his own epitaph. I made a choice that war told me was impossible. I paid for that choice every day for 50 years. But I would make it again. Because some things are more important than duty. Some things are more important than orders. Some things are worth carrying even if the weight never lifts. I saved 10 lives. I honored my conscience. I remained human. That is enough. It has to be enough. Because in the end that is all any of us can do. Make the choice that conscience demands. Carry the weight that follows. And hope that 50 years later, when the silence finally breaks, someone will remember that we tried. That in the midst of war's dehumanizing horror, we chose to be human. That we saw not an enemy but a face. And in that face we saw our own.